Hello, and welcome back to Ask Dr. B. So, this is the second video in a series about domestic violence with a primary focus on intimate partner violence. This video in this series was inspired by a question that came in from our audience. So, I want to thank the person who sent that question in, someone who is concerned about a family member or friend who they wonder if they are, in fact, a victim of intimate partner violence. And so they asked me to talk about that. And I realized that this is such a big topic that it's important to really focus on it in chunks, but to try to cover the major pieces. So the first video that I did was focused on just sharing what we know and how big this challenge is. But I want to say that while the challenge may be big, we each have an incredibly important opportunity to be that person who is there for someone who may be going through this. And if we're going through it ourselves, we have an opportunity to change our own narrative. If we have children, we have an opportunity for them to see that we can get out, that we can get help. So this video is focusing on how to recognize the signs when you're worried about someone else and what you can do as a caring person in that potential victim's life. So what might you see? So I want to talk about things that you might see in your friend or family member and things you might witness, observe about the person that they're with. So, and I'm going to talk about people who either they're being physically abused or sexually abused or psychologically abused. In the series I did on destructive relationships, I talked about the fact that those relationships can become physically, sexually, emotionally abusive, but they might be destructive in ways that don't cross those lines, or at least not in leaving bruises or physical damage. So this series is more on how do we see signs that someone may be being physically abused or sexually abused or severe psychological abuse. Okay. So in terms of injuries, you may notice some injuries and the person may give you excuses about them. You know, often you'll hear from somebody who's being physically abused, you know, so they have bruises and maybe a split lip or a black eye, that they're clumsy, you know, they run into things, or, you know, the kids left something out and they tripped and fell. Excuses about why they have the physical signs of physical assault that you see. You also may notice that someone wears clothes that aren't appropriate for the season. So long sleeves during the summer, long pants, you know, that they don't want to ever expose any skin. Now, some abusers know where to cause the damage, that it won't show. But that doesn't mean that, you know, you might be in a situation, if it's a couple of girlfriends, for example, going out, you know, or one at the other's house and trying on clothes. Girls, you know, often do that. They go shopping together, or they go through each other's closet. You might have someone who doesn't want to be seen, right, without all their clothes on. And if there seems to be a number of these things showing up, then you probably ought to pay attention to what you're suspecting. Personality changes in the family member or friend. Somebody who used to be confident, used to be sure of themselves, used to be assertive, express themselves, that changes, and it seems very different when they're in the company of the person, their intimate partner. So those kinds of changes in personality, especially if it's in relation to a new relationship, or some of these other things seem to be true as well, that is something to be very concerned about. The person's world becomes often very small. A key indicator, key manifestation, key consequence of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, is that the individual's world gets very small because the abuser doesn't want them out with friends. And so now you have somebody who used to be social, used to hang out with their friends, family. They're isolating, and they'll make excuses. They'll explain why. Oh, they're so busy, or oh, they're so tired, or oh, my partner and I are doing X, Y, and Z. We're just, don't have time. But that reluctance, sometimes they will seem fearful about spending time because, let's give him the name Jack. Jack thinks that I spend too much time with my friends. Jack thinks that my family has too much influence over me. So it's a fear of spending time with family or friends because the partner doesn't approve. Someone who's in an abusive relationship will often be uncomfortable talking about the stresses and strains of relationships. We all have them. No relationship is perfect. But someone who's being abused may have difficulty, may be uncomfortable, may be afraid to share what's going on that's not perfect. And so the relationship either is not talked about, or when it is, everything's, great and perfect, and he's perfect and he's wonderful. And again, I'm using he and she here because that is the typical situation where it's the man in the relationship that is abusing a woman. And as I said in the prior video, you do see more male on male violence, less woman to woman violence. So I'm going to say he and she in this case, but know that it could be any non-binary couples. It just is often someone who is either male or identifies as more male, who is more likely to be the perpetrator. Okay. So they're uncomfortable talking about this normal stresses and strains. The relationship is presented, either it's not at all, or it's presented in a way that it always seems perfect. They seem overly solicitous of the partner. They make it clear that they don't want to upset their partner. They don't want to say anything, and if you're at an outing or you're together in a group, they become very uneasy if somebody is poking fun at, or because obviously, often abusers are very easily injured. They can't take a joke. Everything is very personal, and they have very low self-esteem themselves, very low self-esteem, and so any insult, and the person who's being abused, the victim, may be very afraid that anything like that could lead to later a beating or an attack because it's, your friends, your families were making fun of me or were teasing me. So they may be very solicitous when you're all together. They may be very uneasy about anyone teasing or making fun of because of the sensitivity that they know they need to have in order to protect this person who is abusive. The person who's the victim in this situation may be overly concerned about pleasing their partner. I mean, just way above and beyond what we normally think of as looking out for making our partners, people we love, happy. The person who's being abused there's an element of fear. I need to make sure they're happy. I need to have the dinner on at time. Doesn't matter if the kids are sick. I still have to make sure that everything's ready. It has that feel. Like it's not about, oh, I love this person and I want to make them happy. It's, I have to make them happy. I have to keep them happy. I have to make sure the kids are quiet. I have to make sure that dinner's on the table. I have to make sure that the house is clean. It's that intensity. They may be constantly checking in with their partner. Their partner may be constantly checking in with them on, texting, that they have to text their every move, that they need to keep them updated about all their activities. Often somebody who is a perpetrator will have such intense control over the person that they're abusing. So they're not allowed to be out after a certain time. They need to check in every 30 minutes. And so you'll see, and there's, again, you can feel the anxiety, the distress, the discomfort. Nothing about this relationship feels relaxed or easy, because it's not. It's deadly. It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And so that sense of anxiety perpetrates, that sense of anxiety, it's not just the perpetrator, but you feel it just in the person's existence, because they're trying to keep so many things controlled so that they try to prevent another attack. Often you see that a victim in this situation doesn't have access to their own money. They don't have a credit card. Even if they're working, the other person manages all the money, gives them an allowance to pay for food, buys their clothes. I mean, it may seem, how can this, if you're not familiar with this, the world that can exist for people who are being abused, it may seem like, wait, how can that be in this day and age? It happens all over America, all over the world, that the perpetrator controls everything about the victim's existence, how much money they're allowed to have, even if they're the earner, how much control, if any, they have over spending. It's a way that they keep them really dependent on them, tied to them. So when you're out and about, the person that you're with may not have access to money, or may not have money, may not be able to choose to buy things on their own. Again, even if they work, and even if they have, their own income, it may be taken from them. You may see your friend or family member, bail on events on a regular basis. I said sometimes they won't even make plans. Also, if they have plans, they may not keep them. They may not go on that outing. They may not be in class that day. They may not be at work that day. So they disappear from life events and activities. They can be very unpredictable, and it can be very confusing, because they used to be predictable, in the past, or responsible, but they're not. They don't seem to be anymore, either of those things. And that could be an indication that, again, there's so much going on and they have so little control over their life. So, and then finally, two more things. One is if it comes out that to their friend, to you, that they're in a violent relationship, they will potentially blame themselves and say, he's a good person. I was talking back. I brought it on. I shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. I made him jealous. I wore that revealing dress, and on and on and on. They may blame themselves for fear that if they don't, or for fear that if he finds out that they let it be known what's happening, that another more abuse could be coming. And here's the other thing that is so hard for people to understand, which is that the person who is the abuser at times may also appear to be the victim's protector, may appear to take care of them, may appear to the person to be, loving, kind, complimentary. But when the switch occurs, it's ugly and violent. And it could be that alcohol or drugs are part of that, make it more likely. Could just be the person's in a bad mood. Could be that it's in back and forth in an argument. It doesn't matter. None of it is okay. None of it ever is justified by, no matter what the perpetrator does outside the violence. But it may be very confusing for the person in the relationship. It may be very confusing for the friends and family members who are trying to help the person. And then all of this, as I've been talking, sort of have woven in here this notion of that the victim will often make excuses. They'll blame themselves, they'll make excuses, they'll hide it, they'll minimize it. They'll try to, redirect. They'll try to tell you you're wrong. You just don't understand. All of that to try to keep the focus away from what's going on because they don't feel like they can leave. They don't feel like they can talk about it. They don't feel like they can get help. They may have been in it for so long, they don't feel like they deserve help. They may not feel like they deserve to feel, what it's like to be taken care of and not abused. And they may have come from an abusive childhood background. So I'll talk more about that when I talk about, signs of abuse when somebody is sort of watching it start to happen to them, what that looks like. All right, so I'm going to talk now in the rest of this video, just some of the things that those of us can do who may recognize or suspect that somebody we care about is in a relationship that includes intimate partner violence, this type of physical, sexual, psychological, and often you have all three. So what can you do? Remember that a relationship can be very violent, even if it's not physical. Could be sexual, could be psychological. So that's number one, to keep in mind that someone could be being abused horribly and not have a mark on them. It's important not to judge the person that's in this situation. Even if it makes no sense to you, it's important not to judge. It's important not to try to be the therapist. If the person is sharing that they want help, then you can help them get to a counselor, get to a therapist, get to a helpline, get to a shelter. But you can't be in that role. You're not trained, unless you're obviously a counselor or therapist who's watching this, and you know what I'm talking about here. But don't ask a million questions. Don't pry. The most important thing you can do is share with them that you believe them. You believe them. You believe in them. You value them. You're there for them. It may take a long time before the person can actually leave that relationship, but you being there can be a lifeline for them. So don't be judgmental. It's really hard if it's it's hard anytime. But if it's a family member, how can you let this happen? We weren't raised that way. Things like that. Totally understandable that may come out of your mouth or that you may think it, but saying it won't help. It'll only be harmful and hurtful. Saying that I believe you and that I'm here to be of help is so valuable to someone in this situation. Stay in touch. Be proactive. Don't wait for them. If they may need to disappear for a while, you may call, they may not respond. You may text, they may not respond. Keep texting, keep calling, and keep it light, because you don't know if the person if their calls and their texts are being monitored. Just, hey, you want to go for a walk today? Hey, the weather is nice. You want to get together at lunch? Just keep it light. When you reach out in any kind of way that could be observed by the person who's abusing them, but don't give up. Stay in touch. You be proactive. Even if they don't respond for a while, they know that you're there. They know that you're offering. They know that you're there for them and that you're not judging them. That can be so incredibly, I cannot underscore enough how important just being there for someone, giving them a different worldview of themselves, of how you see them, of other things that you experience with them, can help them when they do have the strength, when they are ready to try to get out of the relationship. Let the person keep their own power. One of the things that hopefully you're gathering from this video is that the person who's abusive takes control, takes the power away from the person who is being abused. So the last thing that is helpful to someone who's being abused is even a well-intentioned, well-meaning, loving family member or friend coming in and saying, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. That could backfire terribly. It could terrify them because you're not living in their life. You don't know the repercussions of what you're asking them or trying to do. And they may break off the relationship with you out of fear. So let them have that control. Say to them, what can I do to be of help? What do you need? how can I be of help to you? It may be giving them time, just time, taking care of the kids so that maybe they are able to take a breath, think about what else they might want to do. If they're at that point where they're acknowledging it to you, but they're still afraid to get help. They don't have any resources of their own. They're being controlled. They're afraid for the kids. They're afraid for all kinds of reasons. Don't push it. Don't rush it, but offer. What can I do to help? I can look things up. I can gather some resources. Let them go at their pace, but offer to be of help. What can I do? What do you need? I believe in you. And show them in action. Show them in action. And don't give up on them. Don't be angry at them. If you give up on them, it makes it very hard for them not to give up on themselves. We know that it often takes people who are in abusive relationships many tries to get out, to leave, to finally get out. They may even make it all the way to a shelter only to find themselves, for a number of reasons, going back to the abuser, which feels terrible and shameful and demoralizing. And so you being there on the other side of that experience with the message, I'm here. And maybe it'll take a few times, how can I be of help? Don't underestimate the power of your friendship, your relationship, to be a lifeline to that person. You can be a lifeline to that person. And of course, if you are witnessing violence happening to that person, of course you need to contact the authorities. Of course you need to take steps if you're in that situation where you are afraid for their life. Absolutely afraid for their children. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much for watching, for taking this in, for thinking about people in your life who you may think are in this situation, for maybe thinking about how you might be helpful, and maybe thinking about how maybe some of the things that you wish you could do might not be helpful. And I'm going to come back in the next 2 videos and talk about if you're in a situation where you may be the one that you're in an abusive relationship, or an abusive relationship is starting to take shape. What are some of the signs common to abusers? And then I'll talk about, things that a person can do to extricate themselves from an abusive relationship. Thank you again to the person who sent in this question that inspired this series. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for looking out for your own well-being and the well-being of those you love. Take care.